All right, it's 7 o'clock. Welcome to the Hinesburg Select Board meeting, and I will call the meeting to order. First item is any additions or deletions or changes to the published agenda? I don't think so.
For me.
No. And then you typically ask for public comment. Now we are, in the next item on our agenda is public comment about the CSWD Dropoff Center. So does anybody have any other public comment they want to bring up? I guess not. So with that, we'll jump to item 3. And this is an open discussion on the return of CSWD Dropoff Center. I think it was our hope a year ago, as the garage was being built, that the drop-off center would integrate directly into the design, and we wouldn't have lost service either. But things changed a little bit. The CSWD decided to leave the site while the construction was going on, and they are still planning on how they might return. And so that's caused some angst with people in Hinesburg and the Select Board and the town. So we recently sent out a letter to everybody in Hinesburg describing, our desire to have CSWD come back. And then we opened it up and looking for feedback on people's opinion, I think, on that, and also what they're hoping for with a new drop-off center. Did I seem to capture that well? Okay, so I think we can open it up. We have Lin Gardner here, who's our representative to the CSWD board, one of our commissioners. And so with that, we'll open it up if anybody has...
Jen is here for the CSWD.
Oh, okay, hi. Yes. All right, good. So,
Hinesburg resident.
Yes.
yes. So we did invite the public to come to the next 2 meetings. And there is some discussion about maybe another one with CSWD that we'll try to work in, that would probably be in November. So we'll open it up to anybody who wants to comment on the drop-off center or the lack of.
You're welcome to come up to the
Yeah.
tables here. We've got mics right here, so. And just state your name.
Yeah, just introduce yourself.
Buckhill Road.
Yeah.
I have a lot of comments and concerns. I really appreciated the effort that the Select Board made in terms of sending out the letter, kind of summarizing the history of how this has proceeded or not. And I was struck by that in previous discussions with Andrea in terms of what seemed like a lack of follow-through on the part of CSWD to what had been some agreed-upon steps in the process. That discussions began in 2013 about our desire to continue to co-locate it. There seemed to be an agreement that there would be an ongoing temporary facility while the garage was being built. Then the CSWD board decided that it was going to be too costly to set up a temporary facility. So they decided to close. And I don't think anybody expected that from the Select Board or the residents' perspective. And then it's kind of gone on. In October of 2017, your letter indicates that they'd formally decided to leave until after construction. An effort on one of your parts was made to get them to reconsider, which apparently was unsuccessful. So it's been closed at great inconvenience to the residents of Hinesburg and other Chittenden County residents since December of 2017. Just as an aside, you were asking for input about the level of service that we were looking for. my input would be twofold in that regard. One is to put our efforts strongly into advocating for a definite agreement on the part of CSWD, commitment to return to Hinesburg, first of all. And then I would not want anything done in terms of trying to enhance the DOC facility that we had before, if that would mean extra consideration of, the implications of that and the potential delay that might come along with that. So I've looked at the various communications that have come from CSWD. I became concerned when I first saw an update this past March, and they talked about wanting the process to be thoughtful and transparent, but I have my questions about whether that's really occurred. And they indicated that they're working with their board to formulate an overall long-term strategy. And I read that to mean, okay, we're at risk of not having the DLC back. I mean, that was a possibility, it seemed like. And they were going to develop a strategy, and it indicated that over the next few years, this was mostly concerning Burlington and Hinesburg because those were having to be recited. And they talked about a couple of things. One was an irregular plot shape in Hinesburg, and the other was a proximity to a busy road, which I said, what? And they gave that as an engineering challenge in terms of the proposed site here. Again, that didn't seem to have a lot of merit to me as a reason for being hesitant. Then there was a special meeting held and a work session at CSWD about drop-off centers. And they were asking if they were committed to owning and operating a system of drop-off facilities in Chittenden County, period, which would put the threat of all of them in play. And then they summarized things to say that the Board of Commissioners agreed that they wanted to commit to owning and operating drop-off center facilities in Chittenden County. So there seems to be a little lack of consistency the way I read things. And then there was a question about, do they want the same number of centers in the same location, offering the same services, and that's part of what we're here to talk about tonight. And then did they want them to look like or be expanded to what we've had before? And they talked about the cost and necessity when a town requests. It seems like we're starting all over. We're kind of a new applicant instead of having any standing of a previous DOC center being housed here. And then, there was discussion about towns having ownership and whether CSWD would then determine if it's financially feasible in the requested area. They mentioned the fiscal reality of building new sites when their old ones needed improvements. So again, that seemed to be a risk factor for things not going in Hinesburg's favor. There was discussion of fewer sites and maybe a super center as an alternative. So again, maybe not a localized thing returning to Hinesburg. There was a discussion about, specific to Hinesburg in the afternoon, according to their minutes, there was discussion about designing for the future, and they indicated which current footprint in Hinesburg would not allow. So I don't know any more information about that, but there seemed to be an issue now, 4 or 5 years after discussions had initially begun that maybe the footprint was inadequate. They apparently want to eliminate the third tier of service, which is 1 day a week like we've always had at our DOC. And then there was a mention of a menu of DOC investments is needed so that the board can determine priorities. And again, is the return of the DOC in Hinesburg one of those priorities or not? I think it's kind of remained nebulous. So they summarized that discussion about Hinesburg DOC specifically to say that they were interested in a minimal service model, and they were going to look at what that would cost. And in the update in August of 2018, they talked about all the steps that Hinesburg would need to take in order for them to proceed. And they talked about if their board approved the plan for the Hinesburg Dropoff Center, that they would expect construction to begin in the spring of 2019, which, you know, knowing how construction goes, the completion could be 18 or more months from when it was closed, which I find just unacceptable. So that's kind of my comment. I kind of feel like the town has made a good faith effort, and it's not always been returned in kind.
All right, well, thank you, Greg, and I appreciate the sort of historical review you've done there. That's very helpful. Any comments on that?
Are there any comments from the board on any of those points?
I mean, no, I
I
think
would tend to agree with Greg.
yeah,
Really?
I mean, you know, I think it was our expectation, and the town had worked very hard to accommodate them. And so we have been surprised all along when the plans had changed. And, you know, temporarily moving out, and then the time period it's taking to get the ball rolling again to move back. I think just recently we had some communication that said, "Oh, when's the garage done?" Well, the garage, we're ready to have, you know, we're ready. So it's not very well coordinated, we'll say.
I would say that in spades. It's very frustrating.
Does anyone else have something they want to talk about? Or Lynn, at the end, whenever you might want to comment.
Jim.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
So Mitch Barron from Richmond Road. I appreciate my neighbor's detail. I learned some, frankly. I was coming in here more with questions than with a statement, and half of them were answered by that detail. But I do have more, I think, questions that just reflects my lack of knowledge around a few things. And maybe, Lynn, these questions are better for you, but I'll ask them here. Is Chittenden Solid Waste a public service that's in any way overseen, or is it a private entity that
It's actually a municipality.
it's its own?
It's a creation of the state.
Okay.
So the state authorized these solid waste districts to kind of be able, and then member towns within the area voted to join the district. So it is a public entity.
That has like a public oversight board?
The Board of Commissioners, the select board from each community appoints a representative
Okay.
to the board.
What I'm really thinking about is sort of the due course or the due process for failure to live up to expectations or obligations. I'm wondering about what the consequential process is for some of the things we're talking about. What I've heard, what I certainly have seen at town meetings, is concerns. I've heard you speak to it well, Andrea, but from the whole board, as it was just acknowledged, your own frustrations reflecting our community's frustrations, some sense of powerlessness around, we've written letters, we've communicated, we're not seeing things in reciprocity, and I'm wondering what the due process is following that, or if it's more like a private vendor we've solicited services from and haven't been received what we hoped for, which would then have us look for something else.
Yeah.
I understand it's not that, but I'm curious about what so we asked, so the response hasn't been great. What are our alternatives? What are our options?
Well, I mean, we've communicated with them. We've tried to let them follow their process. You know, if at the end we don't get what we want, I'm not really sure what we could do about it. I mean, there might be something, but I don't know that we would. I mean, when we've, you know, and it's not a secret, we've gotten frustrated, but then there are, you know, they've also responded to us and they've told us, well, here's what we're doing. You know, I think having them, you know, before they go and build a new site, to review what should be at these sites, and are there some, you know, what standards have changed.
Sure.
That, you know, that all makes sense.
Sure.
I think, if anything, and I'll just speak for myself, the frustration seems to be it's very slow and it's not really clear, and we're always like, are you really coming back?
Well, and that's to a degree what I'm speaking to.
Yeah.
I think in more subjectively in the conversations that I've had, that question has been lingering pretty strong in our community. I think, and I'm sorry I didn't.
Great.
With Ray's detail, it's substantiated those questions. It's not just sort of my underlying anxiety that I'm picking up that maybe this isn't really going to happen. It sounds like there's a lot of ambivalence, and it's not by no stretch a sure thing. So the question is, and I appreciate his comments, I'm less interested in me providing my design requirements, and I'm more interested in saying, how do we make sure that happens or something happens? I don't even need to speak to the inconvenience. I'm sure you've heard that a dozen times or more over. So I'm more interested in the what happens if. What are we as a community, what are you as a board prepared to do to help leverage our influence to say we're not at the whim of, our community can't be at the whim of a process that may not result in the outcome that we're looking for. What are our alternatives? I guess that's my lingering question.
Well, I'll just speak, I think, one is that we are very parochial. We're thinking about Hinesburg. So in kind of deference to CSWD, they're thinking about the whole county.
Sure.
They're thinking about being able to provide the service that is mandated by the state, or which they have created their own set of bylaws and mission. And so, we see this from our perspective, and I have to appreciate CSWD's perspective of really looking at, and I think in their strategic meeting that they had, that really considering overall what the role of drop-off centers are. So, we want ours, but I can appreciate that they're taking some time, and so I think the lack of we're on different timelines. We're on the timeline. We had been talking about building a new highway garage for, a dozen years, and we got there, and we'd always considered it. So I think we have to appreciate that there's some, they have a different timeline than we do.
Agreed. Andrew,
Right.
let me just reorient my question, because I appreciate that, and I know that the complexities of this are deep. My real specific question, acknowledging their process, which is independent of your process, if their process results in an outcome different than the one that this community has been asking for, what is our select board in a position to do about that?
Well, I think, in Addison County, they operate, the solid waste district in Addison County operates very differently. And many communities in Addison County have contracted with private haulers to basically have a hauler there.
That's right.
I don't know what happens in Franklin and, some of the other counties, but I would expect that that we would very seriously look into what our other options are. I think we're a member of the district.
Is that a financial commitment as
It
well?
is not a financial commitment, and I think that's part of what is hard for all of us as kind of taxpayers, thinking that it's a public service.
Right.
We expect this service to be there, when indeed the cost of trash and recycling is covered by the tipping fees. And so we all are paying, not as taxpayers, but as consumers or depositors. And so I think that's what's difficult, is we think of it as kind of a government service.
And that's helpful. It speaks to sort of my earlier point around, is it a public service with a public service oversight board, or is it a contracted vendor? And if in fact we're paying for it by the per barrel approach, then you're absolutely right. They have less obligation to us, and we have less obligation to them, unless it's the only shop in town and the only option. I'm also aware of the Addison County models, so I know that there are other options.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know really the administrative aspects of that, whether we would withdraw from solid waste, probably not. I mean, because we still do have the opportunity to use any of the other drop-off centers in Chittenden County, so.
And just to be clear, I mean, it's our intention, they're coming back. They've told us that's their intention to come back. So we're not at a point now where like, oh, no, they're not coming back. It's just, I think, the timeline that Andrea talks about, we are on different timelines. And they, I think probably correctly have stopped to say, let's reflect on what we're doing. I can respect the fact that the old drop-off center we had grew holistically, and so, it probably wasn't the safest facility. Now, if they build one from scratch, that's not an excuse anymore. It's gonna, they're gonna have to incorporate all the best safety precautions, et cetera. So
And many
it's a
Hinesburg
challenge.
residents have had an opportunity to visit all the other
Yeah,
drop-off
right.
centers.
Yeah, right.
So we get
Yeah.
to see that, but
Yeah.
but I appreciate that. I guess part of what's driving me is that what I just heard and what's sort of been reflected here is a commitment, but there's a timeline.
Yeah.
What I heard in a reporting of a very good detailed reporting of some minutes and some other meetings seemed to raise that ambiguity greater than what I'm hearing at the table
And I
here.
think the select board, through this letter, wanted to say, because some information out there maybe wasn't reflecting our opinion. Our opinion is, no, it's been our intention.
Right.
We didn't even want them to leave, and it's our intention to have
Yeah.
them come back. And, we're assuming it's the rest of the town's intention too. Let us know. And that, we're fighting, we're pushing this forward for people. So far, we haven't had anyone who said, no, don't have it come back.
Right,
But
right.
there may be somebody out there that would want to say that.
They have indicated that they are planning to come back. What steps that they needed to take place is trying to figure out how they're going to design this new space to accommodate what
Yeah.
the residents need.
Yeah.
And so we'd offered to host a public forum,
Yeah.
but this was just another way to sort of begin gathering that information.
Right.
So we can
And
share with
that's
them.
great, yeah. If this is a timeline issue, I'm inconvenienced but not troubled. If this is we're not sure what level of service, if we're going to continue to offer this level of service, if we're going to be reciting these entirely, if we're doing a new strategic plan for Chittenden County and perhaps Hinesburg doesn't meet the need because of busy roads apparently, or footprints or otherwise, that would be different information. But I appreciate your time in answering my questions. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Anyone else wish to comment? Just introduce yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Aaron Miller, Baldwin Road. Just wanted to talk a little bit about what I would like to see in a drop-off center.
Yeah.
I think maybe that would be helpful for some people to hear. I think, the minimum service model, sounds good on the surface without knowing what it means. But to me, a viable service center really has a place to bring household trash, a place for compost, and a place for recycling, right? And I think if I need to dispose of a fridge or an appliance or sheet metal or a small tree or anything else, there are other places in Chittenden County, Williston, where that becomes a viable place to dispose of that. So for me, I think that's sort of what I would like to see in the future. It's just a place within Hinesburg. It's one thing to have your routine and get up on a Saturday morning and load up the car and then get rid of your waste and swing by the library and come through town and have it be local. I think that's convenient. I think that will drive adoption and sort of help generate tipping fees in a way that's cost effective for CSWD as well. I think the other thing in terms of thinking about what's important about a drop-off center is also just waste education and waste management. So how do we communicate, what is recyclable now, what is compostable, what are policies and best practices, what should I be putting in the trash and what should I be waiting until the rover comes and visits. And so being able to bring that into a community and have those conversations and have a place where you can always talk about what's the best way to get rid of a bag of poison parsnip, or what should I be doing with these bones and can they really be composted, is an important part of having a drop-off center as well.
All right, good. That's very good, Aaron. Thank you. Yeah. So I think just what I heard you say is you're not looking for bells and whistles, but, the basic Saturday morning drop-off and that educational piece, which they certainly provide. So, all right, anyone else? Pat?
My name's Pat Mayer, and since I'm here anyway, and it sounds like you want comments, the more the merrier, it sounds like. And you count this as two, because my husband and I consulted with each other on this, if you're counting. Number one, we want what we had back in terms of services. Number two, if they really want to do more, being open on early weekday morning once a week or late in the evening once a week would be nice, because sometimes Saturdays aren't convenient. And number three, anything else they want to collect, we wouldn't complain. But number one is definitely get us back, so as Aaron said, we can do our Saturday morning drill.
Pat, thanks for mentioning the number 2 point there. That's something that I have thought of quite a bit, but I haven't heard anybody say, so I didn't want to prompt anybody.
Okay.
So that was the first word. So I also agree. I hear you on that
I
one.
think that the only silver lining in having to trot to Williston or South Burlington is you're not married to Saturday morning.
Exactly.
That's not a big deal.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying this not because it's driving us crazy or anything, but just because it sounds like you want as many people as possible to say something.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Lynn, did you want to?
I would like to make a few.
Sure, yeah.
Can I just stand, or do you want?
Yeah, so,
Jim, would you like to come up also?
yeah, that'd be great.
Nudge me if I misstate something. I'm Lin Gardner, resident of Hinesburg, and I'm the representative on the Chittenden Solid Waste Board. Our timeline on the drop-off center, I worked with Phil and I worked with all of you on this. We really worked hard to keep the drop-off center open. On the CSWD side, we put out an RFP, which we were hopeful that Casella would run what's called a fast trash. And after investigating that, there were actually no bids to do that. We went up on top of the hill on Observatory Road. We tried to, we had a really hard look at that site, tried to make that work. Brian Wright, our engineer, after looking at the plans for the town garage and where everything had to be, dug up and moved, and where the drop-off center is now highway, it was pretty much determined that with the construction and everything there really wasn't enough room that was viable to run a drop-off center. And that was the reason that we decided to close it. It wasn't solely economic, it was, safety. All of our drop-off centers around Chittenden County have different safety issues. Like in Richmond, there's lines of cars that end up over on the River Road or 17. There's South Burlington, there's long lines there. I mean, in Burlington, there's not enough space. The only really one that's set up where there's not a lot of weight is the one on Redmond Road in Williston. So moving on to our last board meeting, which was the 12th of October, we had a lengthy discussion with September, excuse me. We had a lengthy discussion with Richmond residents and Richmond Select Board members about retaining the exchange, what do they call it? The exchange building where you drop off things, the reuse centers. And it was discussed very well, and the board did affirm their decision to not have the reuse centers because of safety reasons and other reasons. So back to Hinesburg. In our, is it the tip?
Tip fee?
We have over $300,000 budgeted for the building.
Right.
Do we call that the tip, or is that?
Is it for the capital cost?
Yeah, the capital cost.
No, just the
Just-
capital
okay.
allocation. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with that world.
The solid waste district has over $300,000 budgeted for Hinesburg's project. Now that the town garage is removed, I'm sure Brian Wright will be in touch, with the next phase of figuring out what we exactly have for space. There are some constraints to that space because there's a stream there, and there's more setbacks with solid waste projects than there are regular projects. And when we come up with a final design, the whole Board of Commissioners has to vote on this project, and that is a little bit of a wild card. All the conversations that we've had at board meetings for the last several years, maybe more, everyone realizes that drop-off centers are an integral part of our solid waste management. It's in our mission statement. It's in our strategic planning. The district is committed to running drop-off centers. The one in Hinesburg is the southernmost, and it covers, really Huntington, part of Charlotte, and mostly Hinesburg residents. We have numbers of who uses it. So it's just not real timely, but I believe that in the end, we are going to end up with not a full-use drop-off center, but a limited use, recyclables, trash, organics, which is part of Act 46. I'm not sure about yard and leaf waste. We're out in the country. We do get some. There'll still be a place for electronics. And let's see, what else? I think I said compost for that, yeah. And like the gentleman said earlier about, refrigerators and air conditioners and stuff like that. I know people do drop those off, or did drop them off at the Hinesburg Drop-Off Center, but it's not really made for that. So I will do all that I can in my power on the Board of Commissioners to make sure Hinesburg has a drop-off center. I think it's very important to the community. And if anyone is in politics, you have to go campaign there Saturday morning. And as Pat mentioned, I have had a lot of people mention about more than one day a week. An afternoon or a morning or, some weekday where people can go to the drop-off center. And this afternoon, I just glanced at all of them. I got a number of letters from residents about our meeting tonight, and I'll forward those to Renee. I just didn't have enough time to look at all of them before I came this evening.
And we certainly will collect them all and look at them all.
Right.
And it'll be input that we'll give to CSWD and say, here's some input we got from our townsfolk.
Jen, you?
Yeah, Jen Holiday. I've been working for the Chittenden Solid Waste District for many, many years. I'm also a Heinsberg resident, and I wasn't asked to come here to speak for CSWD.
Okay.
I just came here because I was really interested in what my fellow Heinsbergers have to say about the drop-off center. And so one thing that is really heartening is to hear everybody that's here really want us back and be really interested in solid waste, which really gets me going too. And what's too bad is the frustration that everyone's feeling about that. And we're trying to, Phil, you had said that some of these facilities, they've kind of grown organically over time, and that's very, very true. For 20, 25 years, that's what's happened, and we've just piled stuff on top of stuff on top of stuff. And so now we're trying to take a much more thoughtful approach, which is, where we're at today with the frustration, like everybody wants a drop-off center now. But we want this drop-off center to be the right fit for the community and last a good long time.
25 years,
and be
more,
very, thoughtful about that. So I'm sorry that folks are frustrated, but moving forward, we are going to have a public forum in the town in November after the elections, and we really want it to be a stakeholder process where people from Hinesburg come in and at this meeting, and they sit at work tables, and we work together with the given layout and what people want to see and what are our challenges, and really make it a working session with Hinesburg residents. So we don't have that date picked yet. We're planning it right now, and we hope that these folks and a lot more folks will show up for that process and to help us look at that for the next 20, 25 years.
All right, good. Well, that sounds very promising. Thank you, and thank you, Lynn. So we certainly will capture all the comments that people have. We're going to do it again at our next meeting, and then we look forward to this work session with CSWD and, sort of planning sort of the future for the drop-off center. Good. Thank you.
Thank you for your
Yeah.
time.
Thanks for coming.
So you have a long agenda. So.
Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is interviews for the AARC
Yes.
board,
Agency Request Review Committee.
Agency Request Review Committee, and the Forest Committee. So I think the first one up is Roberta. So Roberta Saul is applying for the Agency Request
Review Committee.
Review Committee,
Say it 3 times really fast.
which is the group that looks at at the town budget, where we budget about $30,000 a year for nonprofits that support Hinesburg. And this committee has been working for 8 years or 6 years or a number of years, and providing advice on which requests we get that seem to fit best and serve our community with the limited funds we have. So do you want to sort of, I gave you all the stuff there, right? So tell us why you're looking to do this.
Sure,
Yeah.
right. Roberta Saul. I've been a resident of Hinesburg for 28 years. My kids attended schools here, so I was very involved in the schools. I've been involved with the Hinesburg Community Resource Center for over 20 years, working with various programs, parenting programs, literacy programs. And then professionally, I worked over 20 years as a social worker at the hospital, at the health department, so working with members, people who lived in Chittenden County as well as Hinesburg, and have worked with lots of the social service agencies. So I thought with my commitment to Hinesburg and my experience as a social worker, it would be a good fit to help advise the town and what agencies provide good services.
I would say, speaking to that point right there, as I was reviewing the application, that you're uniquely qualified for weighing in on the conversations that the AARC has regarding recommendations to the town, ultimately, as to where essentially this $30,000 goes every year, which is, wish it was more. It's incredibly generous, and it's not particularly easy sometimes to figure out how to allocate and recommend where that money goes. And as someone who has spent years literally seeing the other end of that chain of money and where it goes to,
Right.
and how it directly helps, and how perhaps where it wasn't helping, even though it was still coming in, is very valuable. So thank you for putting your name forward. If in fact it was you and not somebody who put you up to
No,
it.
it was totally me. It was totally my own initiative.
To do this.
I thought,
I
this
was-
is where I could
Yeah.
use my skills.
Absolutely, and I was very excited to see this come over the screen for me.
Oh, great,
So
thank
thank you.
you.
Any other comments? Yeah, I guess I'll speak for the board. Thank you for volunteering. You are uniquely qualified, and this is an important action that the town takes. And I think, I know we have confidence in the committee, and it does take the burden off the select board, because at one time they were the ones making these decisions.
Well,
And-
I was at the town meeting when it was exciting when the town said, let's donate more money to these agencies. So I think that's how this committee evolved, so.
Yeah,
So
I would
it's-
say, having been on the select board when it was our decision, we gave it very little thought, and basically didn't have any parameters or criteria that we would use to decide whether, who, sometimes we didn't even know who these agencies were, but felt obligated to put it on the warning on the article. And so I think it's really helpful that we have a group of committed citizens who have some knowledge and can do a little research and be sure that our tax dollars are going to support organizations that help Hinesburg residents.
Yeah, and because of my experience, I know particularly which agencies,
Yeah.
Yeah.
really
Exactly.
do good work. And
Yeah.
All right, I guess we have a motion, and this position is until which year?
That'll be
It's not for life?
maybe for You didn't see the fine print.
I saw 3 years is
Oh,
what
okay.
I saw.
I guess give her 3 years then.
So then it would be until
Make
2021?
So if we think about this, because presumably you'd want to join immediately, correct?
Well, yeah, I was aware that there's an upcoming meeting in November.
So if
to,
this is
That's 18, yeah.
Exactly, so if this is 18, so 19, 20, 21, so through the work is generally done, correct me if I'm wrong, Renee, by the end of the year?
I mean, yes,
More or less.
they'll have their meetings shortly and make those decisions early November. And then they come to town meeting and answer questions and things
Yeah.
of people have specific questions.
2020, that'd be 3 years.
Yeah, and so if we go, one of the things I was thinking about is having the term, and that's what I'm going to look right now. I should have thought of this earlier, but having the term actually expire, having to
February
coincide with not so much January 1st like we always do, but town meeting day.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
No,
'cause-
that's a good, yeah.
Then
Because
then
It'll
we'll
be
have some
different.
committees are going to be January, some are, it's
Well,
it's
we'll be
a committee
re-upping
that
them.
really only meets for a very specific period of time in
Yeah,
the
it's
year.
just a few
but-
months.
But it still should just be
And we do the
Consistency.
reappointments prior
Yes.
to
Yeah.
January
Yeah.
1st.
So we could do till 2020, that'd
Yeah.
be 3 years.
that's.
So if I could get a motion.
I would
to-
make a motion to appoint Roberta Saul to the Agency Request Review Committee for a term of 3 years to expire in 2020.
I'll second that, certainly.
All right, any more discussion?
Thank you.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And so
Thank you.
Right, there
motion
you go.
passed.
Thank you, Roberta.
And the next applicant is Aaron Miller, who is applying for the Forest Committee. And we have your packet, I guess you're
Yes.
in our packet. So maybe just briefly just tell us who you are and,
Sure.
and why the Forest Committee
Absolutely.
is something you'd like to participate in.
Yeah, so I'm Aaron Miller. I grew up here in Hinesburg, and so longtime resident with a brief pause for college and a year or two in South Burlington. And since then, I've moved back to Hinesburg and bought a house here, and sort of interested in engaging with a deeper level with the community. The town forest, I think, has been always interesting to me. I grew up and went mountain biking in the town forest and hiking and started trail running there. So I've spent a lot of time there and enjoy the space and the place. But recently I've sort of been engaging more with the Town Forest Committee and some of the activities surrounding the drafting the management plan, and sort of found an appreciation for some of the depth there, and sort of trying to take a long-term perspective for stewarding a natural resource in a complex dynamic system. And I've really enjoyed working with Ethan Tapper, where working really means listening to at this point in time, and learning from him and the depth of his knowledge about the forests. And so I think, that's really speaks to it. I think just from a lens of stewardship and conservation and making it an accessible resource for all folks in Hinesburg.
And I sometimes say this when we appoint people to these committees, that this is my favorite part of being on the select board, getting to know people better, finding out how qualified people are and how engaged they want to become. And the fact that you said, you use the town forest for mountain biking and hiking and say, at that time, this is fantastic. But then, another realization that there's a lot more going on. It's very dynamic. There's history to it. There's strategic planning around it. So I definitely really appreciate it. And I'm personally glad you've applied for this.
Can I say something to Steve?
Yes, sir, sure.
How lucky you are. I've known Aaron since he was 3 years old, and I also knew Steve Russell for a really long time, and I feel deeply the loss of Steve to the town and our town forest committee. Aaron had started attending town forest meetings, and he'd come to our forum about the forestry management plan. So I kind of had him in the back of my mind as a potential town forest committee member. And then Steve died. I thought, oh, we really need to have a Russell, because there's been such a long history of Russells in the town forest, and there were no takers in the Russell family. But Aaron was willing to play with that. And I can't think of any young person or any person I know who could, who I think of as being the same caliber person as Steve Russell. And I don't say that lightly.
Yeah,
I think we are really, really, really lucky.
Okay, so with that, is there a time frame on this one?
Steve's term expired in January 21.
Okay,
it'd be
so
the
this
same,
would be
we'd
fitting that one,
replacing
yeah.
doing that term.
So the motion would be, I'll make the motion for Aaron Miller to be appointed to the Forestry Committee through 2021.
I'll second it.
Okay, any more discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye, and so that motion passed. Thanks a lot.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. I'm excited
All
for
right.
the opportunity.
And Pat, how you have stacked up this forest committee with people who are really
They've been
impressive. Yeah.
They've been willing.
She does a lot of arm twisting on Baldwin
Yeah.
Road.
So,
We'll have to email it.
all right, so then, and you're here through the next two items. So the next, item 5.
Drag Ethan out of the hallway.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
Good.
sure.
I heard Pat talk. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So the next two items are concerning the town forest. The first item is to consider approving a management agreement with Ethan Tapper. This would be between the town and Ethan to help manage timber sale. And then the next item will follow immediately after is to consider approving a harvesting agreement with Brown's Logging and Maple LLC, which then, if the first one goes through, Ethan Tapper would be managing for us.
So my name's Ethan. I'm the Chittenden County Forester, and so just so you know, this management agreement that I would have with the town would be for no money, and it's just basically for my forester licensure. One of the rules is that we have to have written agreements that dictate what we're going to do with our clients, and so this is sort of a strange gray area in that, but this is what I've done in the past, and so
Yeah.
that's what that's for.
Yeah. I think it makes sense because, you're taking the town's resource, you're managing it. And so
Right.
to have a formal agreement seems to make sense, I think.
Yeah, no, I think it's
Yeah.
it's a good place to sort of put down what I do and what I don't do, and just have it come into our relationship with an understanding. I advise the town forest committee all the time, but for a project like this, it's a little bit more concentrated in that way.
Can you describe the project? I mean, so you've outlined the area where you plan to harvest and maybe just how long you think this will take,
Sure.
if it has end date and an end
Yeah.
expectation, and what it is today and what it will be at the end.
So it's basically outlined in our management plan that was written in 2017. Was it approved in 2018?
Yes.
Adopted by the select board?
Yeah, it was approved. for this.
There's basically 3 different harvest areas over the next 10 years that are going to be harvested. And so this is sort of the first one of those areas off that Economo Road access. There would be another job that would be from Hayden Hill West, and then a third job from the Economo Road access, again, over the next 10 years. And so the goal with this area is there's sort of 2 different objectives. Number 1, we have the remnants of those softwood plantations that mostly blew over in the 2010 windstorm. and we're going to continue to sort of regenerate those areas. The goal with all of these is to increase diversity for a bunch of different reasons, for forest health, natural sort of steering the forest towards a condition that's more indicative of a natural, undisturbed forest. We see more diversity in a whole bunch of different ways, and so a plantation is sort of the opposite of that. It's a very non-diverse forest, and our harvesting is seeking to capture some of the value in the wood that's at risk in those plantation areas, while at the same time sort of facilitating the transition from a plantation to more of a natural forest type. And so in that, the area in sort of the, you can see on the southeast, that's where those old plantations were. That's what's listed as stand 1 in the plan. And in those areas, what you'll see is that it's old plantation, it partially blew over, and we would go and create some more patches basically in the areas that have partially blown down to encourage the regeneration that was established following that blowdown, and to create some new areas of regeneration. And so over time we would regenerate all those plantations into naturally regenerated forest stands. And then in the rest of that, they're hardwood stands, mixed hardwood stands, and we'd be doing the same thing, but on a smaller scale. So creating small disturbances, what are called groups. They could be up to an acre in size. A lot of them will be a quarter acre or less, where we'll be basically trying to establish little pockets of regeneration and simulating these natural disturbance event, like a wind microburst or a insect or disease outbreak or something like that. At the same time, we're going to be addressing the threat of the emerald ash borer, and so there is a lot of ash in there, and we are going to be looking pretty hard at the ash as a species that's probably going to not be around this forest, in 20 years or so.
Yeah,
We would expect that most of all is going to be dead.
What's harvestable?
Yeah, so we're targeting a lot of the trees that have some value to them, but at the same time, we're also wanting to preserve seed trees, because we actually want to regenerate ash now in case the emerald ash borer moves through, kills all of our ash, and then sort of runs out of food. And then the trees that we regenerate now will be the future ash that we have. And also just, we never just want to harvest all of anything because there might be resistance. And so anything like that we can breed for, we want to do that. And so that's basically the goal. This is an area that has been harvested before. Not under any sort of comprehensive management plan like the one we have now, with the exception of those plantation areas, which were all thinned really nicely before they all blew over. But I think this is an opportunity to do some really progressive forest management out there. We expect that it's going to, with the recommendation that we're making for the logger, with his equipment, it'll probably take 2 winters. And so we would expect that he'd be in there when the ground freezes. We usually count on first of the year-ish, but you kind of never know, through middle of March. But you also kind of never know. And what sort of puts the end on that logging season is when Huntington will post their roads, because it'll be going out through Huntington.
And it will look bad for a while. I mean, I think we have to be upfront with folks that they're just like the blowdown looks awful for a while.
And I also say that, so from my perspective, it's positive that we're creating healthy forests and that we're going to create really good wildlife habitat and that we're going to generate some income for the town to be used on stewardship projects in Hinesburg's town forests. But for me, what's really exciting about this is to demonstrate responsible forest management. And so for me, I really like being out there and actually implementing silviculture and doing this work. But how I present it and do outreach around it is the most important part for me. Demonstrating the working landscape and demonstrating re-educating people about what forest management is here and diffusing a lot of the ideas that are incorrect about what it is.
Ethan did a really informative walk over on Saturday.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on that. It was a great walk, and I think it's really important, especially in light of the article that was in 7 Days this week, which the front cover of 7 Days was deer, and the first sentence began with a quote from Ethan, which maybe he can explain a little bit. It called Hinesburg a little ecological disaster. And when you look at the area of the forest that Ethan was describing for, I don't know, 2.5 hours talking with the reporter, it looks like this beautiful forest with these beautiful ash trees coming up and just a bed of ferns. And, you know, most people would look at that and think this is beautiful.
Right.
But then I'll let Ethan describe what was happening.
Yeah, so it's what made that you know, the whole forest obviously is an ecological disaster zone. That was hyperbole, but the what made that little area unhealthy is basically that, yeah, you look through it, and the funny thing about it is that everybody in the world for some reason thinks that a well-maintained forest looks like one specific thing. That's like a clean forest, you know, it's big, evenly spaced trees and nothing in the understory, and you can really see through, and sometimes there's that bed of ferns, but that's really not what forests are supposed to look like. And so what was missing from that equation was the presence of understory trees, and you could actually peel apart the ferns, and now the ferns are dying back, and you can see just all these just devastated little hardwood seedlings.
Chewed.
Yeah, just browsed and browsed and browsed and browsed and browsed by deer. And so I really like that site as an educational opportunity. We talked about it a little bit there, because I'm going to take that site, which looks to everybody like looks so idyllic and beautiful, and I'm going to make it look really messy. And I'm going to be taking it from being in an unhealthy condition to being in a healthier condition, and creating stuff like, you know, leaving tops of trees and branches high instead of cutting everything down really low, which is going to create a structural barrier to protect some of that regeneration from deer browse, and creating pockets of regeneration, which will give us a better chance than just allowing little dispersed seedlings here and there to get devastated by deer. And so, you know, among many other things, I think that's going to be a really powerful educational tool. And it's just exciting to work on this forest that already has such a strong culture of forest management.
And history. And,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a lot to it.
Town
Yeah.
forest, 70 years. Some parts have been 90 years. And so, you know, that's already there, but I'm also interested in, you know, the demographics are really different in Hinesburg than they were 7 years ago. And just trying to draw people in and talk about what's going on, and have it just be this really transparent and open process. It's something that we're proud about. It's not something that we want to hide or obfuscate around or anything like that.
Right. All right. Well, that is exciting.
I'm very excited about it.
Good. So, I think, and we have to sign this agreement?
I'll make a
Or who-
motion
yeah.
for the chair to sign it. Is that, I think, how it's,
Yeah.
Can you just explain for the people watching on TV how it works between what the town makes for money, what you get for money, what the logger gets for money, and how all that works?
Yeah. So I'm paid by the state, so I don't get anything. But the way that it will work between the agreement will be, ultimately the timber sale agreement will be between the logger and the town, and the logger will be buying trees on the stump from the town, which means that he's basically paying you for the right to cut and market the standing trees that are marked by me in the forest right now. And so he will be cutting, according to this agreement, this draft agreement that we have, he would be cutting on basically a rate. So he's going to say, I will take these logs, cut them, ship them to market, and then deduct from them my cost to cut and skid that log and ship it. And then the remainder of that will be given to the town. And so, you know, in the case of a hardwood log, he'll say, okay, so this hardwood log is worth X dollars, subtract the trucking, subtract my cutting rate, and the remainder will go into the coffers of the town. But it's a little bit confusing because it's an unusual type of agreement. It's not a straight sale. It's sort of a constant thing where he's cutting logs, shipping them to different markets, paying the town based on what he shipped.
but we see the mill slips, so
That's
we
right.
know what he's shipped.
Yeah.
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 Ethan looks at him in the landing and
Yeah.
can ask him to sort things a little differently.
Yeah, and so there's some monitoring mechanisms that we have. You know, obviously, I wouldn't I wouldn't have recommended a logger that I didn't trust. But yeah, you know, just when he's sending in a payment, he's sending it in with the records of his payments, so we see exactly where the logs were sent, when they were sent, you know, and then when I'm on the job, I'm paying attention to how much wood is on the landing, and I know what the products are and where they're going and when they're there and how many there are, so I can sort of keep tabs on making sure that everything's getting paid for and being accounted for, and all the timber that I'm marking is marked on the stump as well as on the tree, so that I can tell that each tree that's been cut was marked. So, you know, there is some trust that goes into it, for sure, but there's also methods that we have for
oversight.
Yeah, and that's my job within this agreement.
Yeah. So the agreement doesn't have any place to actually sign, but, well, it does say Town of Hinesburg. No, you're right, yeah, there it is, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think
would
the
make a
motion could say,
to have the town administrator sign on behalf of the town, the agreement with Ethan Tapper, Chittenden County Forester.
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, so that motion passed, and thank you very much for that.
Yeah,
So, and then, so the next item is the agreement with Brown's Logging and Maple. We have that in our packet too.
Yep. And so this is a little bit more language. And I see that there's a typo on the third
Yes.
word, an angryment.
It's an agreement.
So we did have a bidding process. I walked this job with 4 different loggers, with different equipment mixes from different places, all of whom I would have trusted to do a great job on this. And I presented those bids. You know, they had slight differences in how much they wanted to pay for stuff. They were very similar, and again, slight differences in their equipment mix. I presented that to the Town Forest Committee, and they made a recommendation for Tim Brown, who is with Brown's Logging and Maple LLC, lives on McGee Road in Hinesburg, that we'd recommend him to be considered for this job.
Okay.
I think part of that, from what I was excited about on part of that, was that I do think it's neat to have a logger from Hinesburg cutting on the town forest, and that he also has, he cut, when he was younger, he cut with the previous logger, Bill Torrey, who did all the work over the last 20 years on there. So I think it's a pretty cool addition to the story that we're kind of developing around the project.
Bill had a pretty late touch on the land, so
Yeah.
that made me feel good about that.
All right.
There's another typo also. Something about,
Thank you.
it says the owner, where was it? Oh. It should be owed, the money owed to the town instead of owned.
Is that on the first page?
The very bottom where it says stumpage. Stumpage is the money owned to the owner. I think it should say owed. Owed to the owner by buyer.
Oh, I see, it's on the
Yeah.
back page there.
And I just had a question about trucking. Like, do we know what the trucking costs are, or does that vary with diesel prices, or?
Yeah, so the truck, you know, and I spelled stuff wrong too. Is the money? Oh, yeah, I see where that typo is. Yeah, so trucking rates are interesting. They're a little bit of a black box, and they're a little bit of an industry standard thing. You know, they are consistent across different truckers, but that said, I don't totally understand how those truckers are making those decisions, or how much calculation that actually goes into them. I think it's just basically based on this is what other guys are doing, and everybody does it about the same. So I don't know where that comes from, but there is that provision of trucking rates must be approved by owner, acting by and through forester. So that just means that they can't ship it wherever they want and charge some exorbitant trucking rate for something that's ultimately not beneficial to the town. But yeah, the truck, I don't have a good answer for that.
I would say we have the same thing at work where there's these surcharges and things, and they all seem to
$65 per ton.
change at the same time, but no one can explain why.
Yeah, and it's,
Yeah.
one of these things that we're also, and this is very prominent in the field of logging is, a lot of times if there's a lot of money going in and a lot of money going out, a lot of times people don't even understand really how much money they're making, and so when the recession hit, a lot of loggers went out of business because they actually didn't have a clear understanding of all the stuff that was going on, including the depreciation of their equipment and all this other stuff. And so the loggers that are still in business, for the most part, have a better understanding of that. But truckers, I don't know.
All right, so I guess if we could get, I'll make the motion to approve this contract.
I am having our attorney just look at it.
Okay.
Really quick, he hasn't provided me
All
any
right,
information.
the
yet.
timber sale contract.
Yeah, the timber sale.
With the correction of the typos, with the assumption the attorney does not make any significant changes, and authorize our town administrator to sign for the select board.
I'll second it.
That sound all right? Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. So that motion passed. So thank you very much, Ethan. And Pat
Thank
and
you.
Aaron.
Thank
So
you.
you're Renee?
I am Renee,
Nice
yes.
to meet you, Renee. So we'll be in touch about it.
Sounds good. You can just send me the revised edits and then I can sign both of those
Perfect.
documents and send them to you.
The only other, really quick piece of town forest business is you should know, and I think I emailed Phil and Renee about this, that at our last meeting, we did give VAST, the Iroquois Snow Beavers in particular, an okay that they can consider using part of the town forest, the Economy Road extension, but not all of it, as a snowmobile trail. But that, they're still dealing with other landowners, and it's still a definite maybe. So, but they could at some point be coming to you looking for.
Yeah, they
some
had to
negotiation.
sign some
Yeah,
paperwork.
yeah, and we put some conditions on it, and
Okay.
we might, need to think more about that
All right.
particularly.
Yep.
That's it.
And I would also just encourage people to come out during the, we have to be concerned about safety, but I think, if Ethan and the Town Forest Committee could have some outings during the winter when the
Another one
logging's going on.
December 16th.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so we are. I would love it if you guys would come out and check it out. We're gonna have one December 16th where there won't be any wood cut, but it'll all be marked, and so you'll get a chance to look at the stuff before it's on the ground, and then you can see sort of the before, during, after. And we'll definitely have a sort of in progress walk too, and just as many opportunities as we can have to sort of show this off.
Process. Yeah.
I'm really excited about, and we've been in touch. I was in touch today with Fellowship of the Wheel, trying to engage with the mountain bike community around that as well, which I think will be important to do.
Good.
Some trails will be closed
Yep.
during the logging, and the
Yeah.
Conway Trailhead will be closed
Yeah.
until we get everything cleaned up.
Okay.
So one more question. Is he pulling just logs or firewood as well, the tops?
Logs and firewood and probably some softwood pulp. But yeah, he'll be pulling everything. We'll send. We'll try and keep as much wood local as we can. So
Yeah.
Tim processes his own firewood, a lot of it. And I was just talking to Lin out in the hallway about sending him some pine and spruce from there too, which I just think I'm just really excited about keeping stuff like that local. As we're generating the resource locally, and it'd be neat to keep it local
Yeah.
and use it locally.
Yeah,
So.
that is great. Good. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all your work.
Thank you guys for coming.
All right, the next item is a continuation of discussion about the wastewater allocation application by BlackRock for Haystack Crossing. And I think we left, we had a discussion at our last meeting, and we had a couple of questions, I think, asking just for clarification in our Appendix E, exactly what the request was, and clarification around Category 1, which we have an allocation that fits into Category 1. And I think we were provided with some backup on that. And this really is just, again, a continuation of sort of questions we might have on it. So I'll open it up. Did you want to say anything? I think you provided what we asked for. Yeah, so I think. I mean,
Well, yeah, I have some questions, because I think one of the things that I asked at the end was what the typical rent would be, and then I also was referring to our recent housing needs assessment report that was done for the Affordable Housing Committee, and so I had an opportunity to look at that, and that's some of the information that is not in here, is kind of who what the market is for these, and I'm sure that there seems like there's a demand for this type of housing. What I'm concerned about is that we're looking at this as a special project in our Category 1, and I want to be sure that we are serving the needs of Hinesburg residents. And so there's a lot of information in this housing needs assessment report, both in terms of talking about rentals and home ownership and breaking it all down. There's lots of tables. And so I looked at it pretty quickly, but I really would like to understand a little bit more about both from Ben and also from our Affordable Housing Committee about whether this does kind of meet the needs that are identified for Hinesburg residents. You know, it's one thing to develop a housing complex, but if it's not going to work for people here who are wanting to downsize and be able to stay in the community, then I'm not sure. You know, I think that's from my perspective, that's my priority, is to be, especially because we do have this limited resource, and how we can really work for existing Hinesburg residents, with the idea that as people downsize, those houses that they're living in the, outside of the village, become available to new residents to come in. So I'd like the opportunity for the Affordable Housing Committee to look at this and to evaluate this against some of the information that's in the housing needs assessment.
and so it's my understanding they plan to do that fairly.
Well, I don't see the.
I did CC them on this letter when it
Yeah.
came to you per their request.
Okay.
And I have met with that organization or that committee numerous times over the last 5 years. And to be quite candid, the one message that I've come out with every single time is larger scale senior housing, because really that is, as I understood it from them, and really my anecdotal knowledge of housing in Hinesburg, that is the single component that this town just doesn't have. There have been some affordable projects of late. There's a decent cross-section of housing. There is no larger scale senior housing here. And so what it does mean is folks who are looking for that independent, or in some cases assisted apartment, are going to either Shelburne, or it's not even really Williston. There's not that much of it in Williston. It's Essex is where sort of the high concentration is. So I see it as being not only important because of the lack of that type of housing here, but I think it's also important because with the exception of the very expensive stuff in Shelburne, there isn't really anything even in a neighboring town. I mean, we're talking half hour or more away, and that does take a bite out of family visits and time and things like that. So
I mean, I think the question we're just sort of discussing really is this Category 1, and my understanding there isn't any more of a descriptor of what Category 1 is except what's written here. Is that correct?
So I
It
think
says,
I misspoke at the last meeting when you asked that question. So I went back into the definitions. There is a more expansive definition of the institutional term.
Okay.
And so if you look in the definition section of the ordinance, you can see what that is, and it includes. I have it up here. Institutional category includes pertaining to the public sector or municipal obligation or a project deemed by the board to be important to the general health and well-being of the community. Such projects could include schools, town offices, care facilities, medical facilities, libraries, affordable housing as defined in the zoning regs, elderly housing, assisted living facilities, or other.
Okay.
So that's what
So there is, all
institutional
right.
is.
So I think that, that was one of our questions I think we had last time. Why would this fall under category 1? So I think that helps sort of, maybe bring it closer, that says, yes, these are the type of things that could fall under category 1.
And I think just to add, we have an opportunity in this phase 1 to bring forth kind of one big ticket item. Because of what's available or even what the well might offer, if I built 2 or 3 big buildings, that would be it. And you'd have a couple big buildings in a field, and that really wouldn't fit with the character necessarily. So we felt it was important to bring one of these bigger ticket items to the forefront. And so really we were weighing, does it make sense to have, 40 affordable apartments? Or does it make more sense to have the senior care? And again, I'm sort of looking around town, if you will, and the senior care seems to be the thing that's missing. And again, in all of my meetings with that committee, that has been their primary focus.
I guess my concern is that there's, the housing needs assessment recognizes that we really aren't in a position to have an assisted living facility in Hinesburg. Mm-hmm. So that's not what we're looking at. And so you referred to it as a 55 and over facility.
Independent living. There isn't that is an unregulated category by the state of Vermont. So the state of Vermont regulates assisted living, they regulate memory care, and they regulate skilled nursing under different levels of care. There is no regulation for independent living. So I actually watched another developer in another town sort of wade through this challenge. And the closest this other town could come was having that 55 and up designation, because what that meant was it was always going to be senior apartments. There wasn't a way to sort of revert it back into some sort of market rate apartment use. So from what I've seen in the neighboring towns, that seems like the best tool for a DRB to use as a condition on an approval. So that's not a problem, because that's what we're bringing forth. So.
And the scale is sufficient enough that there would be an expectation there'd be some level of service associated with that, I'll say a caretaker's not the right term, but somebody there who would be monitoring the facility and assisting.
This is a full-time staff, 40-hour-a-week staffing model. The question becomes, again, it falls to the food service, and it really depends on what sort of operator setup we're using. Following the last meeting, I did have a follow-up conversation with Cathedral Square. They obviously said, keep us apprised of your progress, but their funding, she reiterated, their funding just has them out 5 or 6 years before they can look at a project like this again. So I did, after per your request, I followed up with them again. And I'm hearing that story from all the nonprofits. It's a challenge right now. I think there was a big sort of boom over the last few years, and they want to see the money get spread around the state.
But I guess that's my question then is that you were talking about a monthly rent of $3,600.
That's the top of the market.
Yeah.
That's the top of the market. Absolute. That's the.
Because you said that was going to be considerably less than places that were like $5,000.
We're working on some models, and I realize I'm speaking on the record, but this is to qualify, this is a pro forma number.
Yes.
We're working on a project in Burlington, which we are pro formaing at under $2,000 a month, which is almost half of that number.
Yeah.
So we are, and we do not see, we're going to own this most likely. We have to meet the market. We understand this. Hinesburg is not Shelburne, just like Burlington is not Shelburne. And the facilities that we have partnered with in Essex are a different model than what we're looking at here. They're just different. And so we do, obviously, as the owner of this facility, we want it to be successful. And in order to be successful, it needs to be full. And so in order to accomplish that goal, we really need to meet the economic needs of the people in the community. And so, this is one where we will look to, meet that lower number. And what the number is, I can't commit to in this room. I can't even commit to it really until I understand how much the building's going to cost. But that is our goal.
Yeah.
If we thought that a $4,000 a month facility would work in Hinesburg, I'd tell you that, but I think we all know it won't. So we need to work towards getting a manageable number.
Yeah, because I do think though that your need to fill the building is not quite the same as the need of our residents to have a place to go. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm looking for is the place where those meet. Mm-hmm. And, when I heard $3,600 a month, I was like, I don't think there's a lot of people who are in that 55 and over demographic in Hinesburg who would be able to downsize to such a facility. But I don't doubt that there's a lot of people who would pay $3,600 a month and move to Hinesburg. So that would meet your need. So I guess what I'm looking for is, if we are to move ahead with this, is that we really are, and our job is to think about the residents of Hinesburg. And I think there probably is a place where they will meet. But I've been through this process before, and we didn't get, what we wanted. So I'm feeling and this is about the only leverage that we as a select board have to get an outcome that we've all as a community have been talking about. So that's why I am trying to take this slowly and figure out exactly how we can assure ourselves that it's the residents of Hinesburg who are going to be served by this, and why we're calling it a special needs project. I think Val has a...
Add something. What also might play into that as far as Hinesburg people is those that are looking to have an older mother, father close to them. They might not, the mom and dad don't live in Hinesburg now. I do. I want my parents there, so it works for a Hinesburg resident, but in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to actually say something similar to what Val did, because that would be kind of a new criteria that would be presenting, because we didn't present that criteria when Green Street applied. Green Street it's in Hinesburg. Hinesburg residents were encouraged to apply. But for the most part, it's people from out of Hinesburg who moved in. So I can't see why we should put that type of stipulation on this project and not others.
I'm not saying it's a stipulation. I'm just trying to get as much information as possible so that we...
I think that your point is well taken, and I think that it is our goal with these to build facilities within the community. People migrate in senior care not out of choice but out of necessity. And so, right now, again, for seniors looking for this type of housing, 100% of them are leaving Hinesburg in order to move into a place like this. So really, we need to encourage, create the opportunity for them to stay here. And, I think that's different than some other towns. So in Essex, where we've seen migration between one facility and another, and it's a little more competitive. I don't view this as being a competitive market where we're trying to draw people from all over. I think that in a town that is completely underserved, you would see, my guess is the applications come in relatively quickly from, meaning the first 12 to 24 months from local folks, and then really it's Hinesburg is a little ways out there, so it's not like someone their first choice if they live in Essex is going to be to come to Hinesburg. I don't see that as being and where we want to be aggressive with the pricing. If it's a privately funded facility, we're not going to be able to get that aggressive with the pricing where it's so dramatically below. People are driving from near and far. So the goal really is to be for the facility to be for Hinesburg residents. And, I do think, to Val's point, the location is what's so important. Just even on that side of the development, the eventual walking connection to the communities here, potentially to a supermarket later on, and to other services is really something that's sought out in the industry. As soon as you have to get in a car, it just becomes more difficult. And we think, and this is just our internal point of view, we think that the proximity to the town rec fields is another huge factor. Not even for folks you'd be surprised the number of people who will go out to a ball game on a Saturday morning, even if their grandchild isn't playing. So it really is about things for people to do as well. And when I look at competitive communities, even at Taft's Corners, which is a growing walkable market, it's still a little bit on an island there. Blair Park doesn't feel like it's ingrained in the community. So, this location is aesthetically better than Shelburne Bay. I mean, Shelburne Bay is on Route 7 and it's connected to nothing. You've got Taft's Corners on a little bit of an island. Our development in Essex is a pretty good location next to the resort. That one in the town forest is a good one, but it's not in the heart of the community like this is. This is unique, which is something nice. And usually I'm pitching these in a green field on the edge of town, so this one feels really good to be talking about given its geographic location.
Any other comments? I mean, I have a couple, but so my thoughts, I think one was category 1, I think was now we've become a little more educated that, does it really fall into that, or could it fall into that? The next, thing that I noticed is this does, for what we have presently to allocate, this does use up pretty much all of category 1. And so I would be looking just to reach out, I think, to you, Alex, and planning, and is like, is there anything else that we see coming down the pike? I mean, I don't see a new school coming, but is there anything else that, might fall into this that we see coming down? Like we have the health center that was built. I mean, but, if that wasn't there, this category would be for something like that too. So that's one thing I just like, okay, this, uses up pretty much all of that category. And does that seem like it's going to meet the town needs? I think and under category 3, it's sort of the same thing. It uses up most of that category after we have to, we could easily shift things around between residential and enterprise. And I think you gave a good explanation on, why that might seem appropriate.
I had a long talk with Mitch because as I broke it down, I sort of struggled with it. And then the light bulb went off that we're accommodating for, I forget what the number is, like 85 employees.
Yes, right.
But we don't know what the use is yet.
Yeah,
and
it's hard
so
to,
there isn't a good way to...
No, I thought that was helpful to be able to read through that. And so my thought about category 3, since it, will pretty much use that one up too. I mean, is there anything else coming down. So in that category 3, that district, that also includes NRG is in there too. And I don't know where they are necessarily on their process. And, you know, I just want to make sure it's a good process and that we're allocating this to be, you know, the best for the town. But I certainly appreciate the discussion we're having. I'm learning a lot, and I think it's good to just get it sort of all on the table. So this is very, very helpful, I think.
That was one of my questions too, as to what is coming. That we not what do we anticipate was coming, but what do we know? Where are others in this?
So I talked to Mitch about this a little while ago. There's nothing else that we're aware of in the Category 3 portion of town. That's a geographic area.
Yeah, sure.
That includes the Haystack Crossing property on the the west side of Route 116, the properties around NRG on the east side of 116, but also includes Ballard's Corner and up the Richmond Road all the way to Iroquois Manufacturing. We're not aware of any additional projects in this fiscal year, which is what these allocations are for, in those veins. That's not to say that somebody won't walk through the door in January and, you know, start a project, but at the moment, Jan Blumstrom has already been to you to request allocation for the first sort of piece of her master plan, and that's, I think, what they're focused on at the moment.
And that was a small manufacturing.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. They had a certain number of employees, similar to what Ben is asking for, and also a level of processed water. Yep. And that's really about it in Category 3. I guess there's a project on the Richmond Road that you also have already granted allocation for, Giroux-Besaw subdivision. Haven't heard anything out of Iroquois Manufacturing in terms of any expansion. They did one 10 years ago or so. Seemed to be trundling along fine. So at least in Category 3, I'm not aware of anything else that's sort of imminent. Category 1 is a category we almost never use. And all the traditional uses, as you said, Phil, it doesn't seem like there's a need in terms of schools or the town itself or a medical facility. All these things are here and have been expanded in the last 10 to 15 years to a point that we're not aware of anybody needing to come back for additional allocation. Not to say there won't be. I'm a little concerned that this soaks up the bulk of that category. It doesn't leave a whole lot of slack in case something does come up. But this is an annual refreshing that happens, and that category is refreshed first.
Right, I think there's a minimum. Yeah, I guess the others have a minimum too.
I would tell you what I've been telling Ben all the way along, that I think that if you're inclined to support the allocation, but you're concerned about the sort of Phase 1A and Phase 1B and the new well and how that all works together, Ben has worked with our office to say, listen, I'm coming to the DRB for the full Phase 1, but I would like to get allocation from the Select Board for 1A and then 1B when the new well comes online. But the DRB is going to see Phase 1, which is good because it's a more comprehensive phase that we've been talking about. If you're cautious about that sort of split approach, you know, you could include some sort of, or consider including some sort of clawback provision that says if what we're not expecting happens, i.e. the new well doesn't produce by a date certain, you know, that this initial allocation could be clawed back. Normally, these allocations are for 3 years.
That might sound good for us, but I don't think for these guys.
Well, I think the reason that it provides you, the reason that you would have the ability to do that is the ordinance says that you're not supposed to give allocations for partial projects. You're supposed to give them for complete projects. Now, this project was approved as a master plan, and I think it's silly to think that they should have to get allocation for the entire
Yeah.
project,
And
but
not be able to move forward.
but there's a clear phase that's being developed
Mm-hmm.
here, and this allocation is not for that whole phase. It's for
Right.
just a portion of it. If only that portion were to come to the DRB, I think there would be some serious issues with that review.
because
but as
it's
a
not complete, it's kind of spotty.
it looks a bit like an island,
Yeah.
but the full phase it's something that I think our office feels is very compatible with what the regulations call for, and it's on the southern border. It can be connected and all of that. So I think you have some wiggle room in your ordinance to introduce a clawback condition. It's just a suggestion. Maybe you don't need to do that. Maybe you're satisfied and the new well will come along. But I know that when you're allocating everything you have from category 1, and if you're concerned about that, well, if this project can't move forward because the well doesn't pan out, maybe that's a way to get that back sooner rather than having to wait 3 years or until the DRB eventually, adjudicates this thing.
I think that in the event that the well didn't produce on that level, I think we've agreed that this plan that is attached to this allocation request would not conform with what the DRB is looking for. So at minimum, in the event the well yielded 0 and we had this amount of allocation, I would need to, without removing the senior care or the affordable housing components, need to rejigger this with your office and then come back before the board and basically ask you to reaffirm the allocation you'd given based on a revised layout that we could have staff get behind, and then we would go to the DRB. So I don't see a world where we wouldn't move forward with what you're allocating for now, and I don't see a world where it wouldn't include the components that we requested out of category 1. Really, in a worst case scenario, as Alex is describing, we would need to revise this to be acceptable to staff on that level. That's really the barometer that we use. So if staff is happy, then we're ready to move forward with the DRB. So that would be a process where, and I think that would pass the straight face test. This is attached to what we're requesting now, and if this changes, then we would need to come back.
Any more questions? Anybody has?
Well, I'd really like to ask the Affordable Housing Committee.
I
I think they're
agree.
meeting this Wednesday.
Yeah.
So I think, we can ask them to come in, give us, ideally, right? They would say, yes, this falls within the, in their opinion, it does meet some senior housing needs and or affordable housing needs. And so,
I could talk to that or speak to that, but I think it's probably better that you hear from the committee.
Yeah, I think so.
The report does
Yeah.
sort of speak for itself about what
Yeah,
the
I
need
haven't
is.
had a chance to look at that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I worked with them on it. I'm pretty familiar with it,
Yeah.
but they did a lot of work thinking through this, working with a consultant, and they've spent more time trying to understand what it means and how it relates to actual projects. So yeah, hearing from them wouldn't be a bad thing,
so.
even if
That
I
I
could
think would
spit
be
out
good.
some of what it says
Yep.
up on the screen there already.
So I think that would be good. And I think for me, too, I'd like to get something, from you, Alec, or staff that sort of says, because, again, we're taking up category 3. It's like, here's what's out there. Here's, potentially what might come.
At least see a chart of everything.
Yeah,
if
I
can
think something like
if I can
that
get
would be good.
The list of already allocated, existing allocations that have been granted but aren't in use yet, then I can build from that and create a list
Should be
of.
on our website.
It's not, but our current allocation pools are on the website
Yeah.
now.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Aaron. But that list I still haven't seen yet. So, but if I get that, I can do that.
That would be
for you.
helpful, I think. So maybe by the next meeting, we might get some input from the Affordable Care Committee, and then just for me, I know I just like to. I wouldn't I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, yep, here we go, and not knowing all the pieces that are out there and sort of say, okay, now I know everything that's out there and now I can make a informed decision, I think.
Yeah, my only comment is that I'm happy to do that. I don't, Mitch and I have discussed it. I don't think that chart is gonna say anything different than what I've just said tonight.
That's fine,
We
but
don't foresee anything, there's nothing imminent on the
Right.
permitting
But,
horizon.
yeah, for me, I like the visual, yeah, for me, yeah.
Sure.
It's really
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, I think seeing what the ones that have already been allocated that you've done in the last 6 months or so would be good to have on your,
Yeah.
in front of you. So
Right.
you're like, oh
Right.
yeah, those
Okay.
projects are all happening
Yeah.
and already have their allocations.
Yeah.
If, you know, if you get on the agenda for like January with the DRB and they look at it for a couple months, 3 months, 4 months, 4 meetings or something, you know, let's say when do you think you would be ready for construction?
That's a loaded question.
Right, well, I mean, because it's allocation, right? And we only get, you know, so we are going to essentially, until that project comes online, we will not be able to do any other allocations. So are we talking about it being 2 years, 3 years, that we're not going to be able, we're going to be back where we were?
I can tell you I'm moving a project larger than this through the Essex Junction Board in less than 12 months. So.
Well, I'm
it
asking about
is-
construction.
Well, as far as if anybody saw the Free Press today, there was an interesting article about housing demand under $600,000 in Chittenden County that basically it's so white hot you can't imagine. There is, for almost every segment of this, there is an unbelievable demand right now. So from a construction standpoint, it will go probably quicker than other projects in Hinesburg's had in the past. As far as how long it takes me to get there, it's taken me 5 years to get here. So it is
Well, you can almost see first base.
almost. So to answer your question, in a process where we do not wind up in E-court, either at the town or Act 250 level, even moving at a little bit of a glacial pace, I would say from where we are today, 18 months would be reasonable.
And they'll be occupied and we will be
No,
able to
but
have
we
the
would-
allocation.
We would be breaking ground.
Right, so breaking ground, so, but then the construction, because it won't come off of our allocation pool until those are hooked up.
Correct.
You know, so that's what I'm trying to think is.
Construction of a large-scale building like that, a nice round number to use is a year. So we're 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And so that's,
There'll be other allocations that are in our mix that will come online before that.
Right.
The Norris project is under construction now, and so we will be recapturing that portion of that allocation. And then, well, again, when you see this list of everything you've
Right.
already granted, some of those projects, one would think, would be online faster than this one because they're smaller. Or you'd take their allocations away at some point and not continue to renew them.
Right, but I think that's what I'm trying to look at is the whole timing and sequencing of this so that you know, we're able to continue to accommodate other.
And you're absolutely right, Andrea. Because of the allocations that you've granted recently, whether or not you grant this one, but assuming if you did, the allocations for this project, for the Hinesburg Center project that Brett Grabowski is trying to pursue, the allocation for the project Jan Blomstrom is trying to pursue, the allocations for the subdivision on the Richmond Road, all of those are making what's left smaller, and it'll be very limited for sure until the well happens, and then it won't be so limited anymore. But that's also a bit of a unknown time horizon because of the need to, you know, get financing for that.
Yeah.
Voter approval.
Andrew, I don't know what you're.
I
I understand your concern, but this is the process that we put forth.
I know.
So
I
it's-
just wanted to be sure that we all have the information. That's
Right.
all I'm asking for.
it's
It's
a valid concern. The problem is that, as I understand it, this is the board's process, and the problem is when this leaves this room, It's anybody's guess how long it takes. And unfortunately, just given the way things have unfolded the last 5 to 10 years, it is a real, I mean, I'm being honest, it's a real question mark. Internally, 3-4 years, we don't know.
Well, I mean, I think it's you know, I think it's, we are, in Hinesburg, we're in this kind of really unique and difficult position of, you know, having had some capacity in our wastewater treatment, you know, and so I feel like it's not just the process, it's the actual facts of where we're at with our infrastructure. And we have not really been able to move, certainly at the rate that developers want, in addressing what our infrastructure needs are, because there is policy involved in that, but there's also cost, you know, real cost for a very small system. I think we're.
Well, and I think the challenge is without new users, it's even harder to grow that. You know, even the implementation of the current fee structure, the current impact fee structure, the town hasn't really gained any benefit from that yet. It's just beginning to. And there's, believe me, I'm reading the other side. There's a huge wall of money attached to all of these GPD numbers we're talking about. But until we can sort of get, so it's a chicken and egg.
And I certainly also feel, I mean, I recognize when you sent those sketches that those are 2-story buildings and you're talking about 3-story buildings for here. And so that will have a tremendous impact on our fire department in terms of you know, and we do have impact fees for police and fire, but we really will need to look at that to make sure that we will be able to provide the adequate services for that kind of building.
And part of that is just calls.
Well, calls, right.
Just
Yeah.
daily
Okay,
calls.
sorry.
That falls through into the DRB piece of it, yeah.
Well, and that, in fairness, that the calls issue is what I've been hearing from the fire chief, that once we have a senior care facility or senior housing, the need for emergency services, ambulance is greater. But the need for a aerial truck to address larger buildings is what the impact fees are for, and we are collecting them, and these projects will pay them to help us get there. And similarly, the revision that you all did to the water and wastewater fees, which increased them substantially in 2016, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars, you know, towards hopefully these expansions that we know we're going to need to make. Now, whether we need to collect more or not is a question for some of the engineering that we're going to be doing. But I will tell you that I'm working with Eric to try to better understand the cost numbers, not for this project, but for Brett Grabowski's project. He's been working with the Affordable Housing Committee as well, and his contention is that the fees that we're charging for water and wastewater are very large and making it difficult for him to bring that project in. It's a large sum of money. So I'm going to work with Eric and see, verify the calculations on that front so we can talk real numbers. But yeah, these projects definitely will have a demand. They're also paying part of the way to meet that demand, and then the question is how do we pay for the rest of it? It's not an easy question.
All right, so I think we have a couple questions that affordable housing, get their opinion. We asked for just a sort of outline, or are there any other questions that the board has now?
The affordable housing, I understand the need to include them on this process, but you've met with them a dozen times, maybe?
I don't think a dozen.
Half dozen times?
I've met with them probably a half dozen times.
Do they have new information?
Well, I think they just got
that report.
What Ben just sent to us.
Yeah.
That's all.
Right.
And I may
I'm
chat with them on
just kind
Wednesday
of
too.
figuring this out for myself to try to understand what it is we're exactly waiting for. Conceptually, I get it, but what is it that
I'm
they're
looking
going to see?
for them to say, yeah, this is, this project, with I'll say satisfy,
Yeah.
can genuinely satisfy what we're looking for in Hinesburg as far as affordable housing and senior housing.
And that we're using this special needs category.
Right.
So that's why I feel like it's important to get their input, because we are tapping into a kind of, we did reserve our discretion on, special project. And I guess I feel like, Ben is making the case that this is a special project, that it's meeting a need. We have the Affordable Housing Committee. We have this needs assessment. They've studied that needs assessment in depth. So I'd like them to be able to, give us the green light that, yes, this is exactly what we're looking for.
Or, it doesn't have to be exact,
Right,
but it's
but,
like
it meets those criteria.
Yeah,
They can look at a host of factors there, and I think the key one is the one Andrea was moving towards, which is it is a fully market rate project.
Yeah.
What the housing needs assessment says Hinesburg is looking for, or are we looking for a blended project that is market rate with some below market rate? And I'll let them speak to it.
Sure.
The report does talk about that a little bit and talk about what the senior demographic in Hinesburg is like in terms of median income and all that.
I was wondering.
okay.
And it's not to say that we can't evaluate. There are some nonprofits out there who have 2 vouchers or 3 vouchers or 5 vouchers that they will take 3 units or 5 units in a building. And we've talked with them about other projects of doing that. Just the reality is, due to the timing and things, it is hard to get anybody to talk about things out here because it's a black hole, and nobody's going to commit 4 units in 2020 to a project as we sit here in 2018. It's just, and we're probably realistically more talking like 2021. So where we can all move forward with the best of intentions, we don't really know. Once a project is permitted, so once I have a shovel-ready project, they all want to talk to you. Mm-hmm. So because then they can look in their budgets and their allocations and earmark things for different projects. But we're just too far away right now.
All right. So I guess we'll shoot for the next meeting to continue the discussion.
Perfect.
So.
And I'll see if they have time to squeeze me in on Wednesday at the Affordable Housing Committee too.
Yeah.
So
I think they're going to discuss it actually.
Yeah.
Good opportunity for you.
I'm here Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday this week.
Well, thanks. So this was a good discussion. I'm happy the way we're working through this.
Alex, is this what you want? What's up on that?
Yes, that is what I want.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you. Yep. Next item on the agenda is, I guess this is a more formal, consider appointing a committee to assist with planning of the wastewater upgrade. So we talked about this last time when we approved the contract with
Aldrich and Elliott.
Aldrich and Elliott, yeah. I think I may have suggested it, but we probably have, I think, talked about saying, this would be good for a small committee to work with them as they work through design options, costs, town policies or town, I'll say policies around upgrade, or I'll say upgrade to the wastewater to meet the permit and the town needs. So I think I volunteered last time to be a part of this. We suggested maybe 2 select board members. I think Aaron also thought they would like to do it. We were looking for somebody from the planning and or yourself, Alex, I think.
I'd be interested as a staff person. I will say that the committee that Andrea and Aaron serve on, the wastewater allocation committee, a lot of the questions that have come up in the last couple of meetings have been about those next steps. So I think that Sarah Murphy from the Development Review Board, Jeff French from the Planning Commission would be 2 people worthy of
at least asking if they'd be interested
Okay,
in.
because it's sort of an extension
It
of
really
that.
feels like that, yeah.
And to that point, that's exactly what I was thinking, is that committee just continues that work in this fashion.
Yeah, I think the citizen
it's
members are
already-
interested as well. Peter Erb and
Rob
Dan
Bass.
Meyer
Rob
and Rob
Yep.
Bast would probably be pretty interested in helping out on that front. I can't speak to their time commitments because they all right now think they're done at the end of the year, but
They didn't read the fine print.
that's right. Once we have you, we can recall you,
that's
just like
exactly
the
my
armed
thought.
services. But as far as from the planning commission, I think Jeff would be a good person for that.
So is that, I mean, it sounds like I'm all right with reaching out to some of those folks. Is that something you'd be able to do for us?
Sure. So you're saying just reaching out to the specific or the entire?
We have.
That committee meets next week.
Tuesday.
Yeah,
so
so
we'll mention it
we
at
can
that
bring it up
meeting.
at that meeting.
Okay, and then get back to
And you know, people don't have to continue. I mean, if they would like to, and you guys could sort of explain, ours is going to be probably a year, maybe a little bit more. And, you know, I don't think we would meet once a month. There might be a couple of meetings, and then it might go a couple of months, and then maybe a meeting or two. So, but do you think you have enough information to?
Well, I think we're gonna wait until they're gonna
You
get back.
guys are gonna do it.
Yeah.
All right, that sounds good. Is
I
there-
can report back to you, Renee.
That'd be great.
With
Okay.
what happens at that committee meeting next week.
Okay, all right,
People's level of interest.
all right.
And you know, there's been a name, other folks too that have been brought up with maybe some experience, so we can continue to work on this. I think in the next two meetings, and maybe we shoot for maybe not next meeting, but the meeting after, actually
Yeah,
sort
making
of
those.
delegating the committee.
First November.
There's a pretty big,
This to me seems different than the water allocation committee, because I'm having a hard time grasping exactly how residents are gonna plan a wastewater upgrade.
I don't think that it'll be all the residents, I think we
Well,
should
no,
just have.
no, but I mean,
oh.
even the committee, because it seems to me like this is an engineering problem, not a planning problem.
Well, it is more of an engineering problem, no question about it. I think in the very beginning, though, as we start to develop, you know, what some of the engineering solutions are, I think there are some decisions around, like, what's the size going to be?
That's
You know, how big should it be? And, you know, I think Andrea brought up, you know, should we expect some businesses to do some pre-treatment, and will that be helpful? Because that's a policy change for the town. So I think initially, I mean, I think you're right. It tends to be more engineering, sort of. Where do we have to get to, and how do we get there? And that's an engineering question. But then we also said we were going to look at costs. So what do we expect the cost to be, and how much are we going to generate with new development and allocation sort of cost? And wait a minute, that delta is, you know, that's too much. That's not enough. What can we charge in allocations going forward?
I was thinking the same thing you were, Tom. It's like, why do you even need a committee? This is a technical challenge, but I think the more I've heard you talk about it, that and those initial questions is where I think there's real value in having other committees and community members contributing. Maybe once those questions are largely answered and you're in the actual, you know, how big is this tank versus where does it discharge into and how does it bubble through this? I mean, that kind of stuff.
Here's a new technology versus a proven technology, and, you know, what are the positives and negatives, you know, or this is cost less but more to operate. Those are sort of engineering questions.
Yeah, I imagine the
Right,
committee
but I
would
think
have
one of
less
the
input
things
into
is that
those.
if you don't ask a lot of questions
Yeah.
of the engineers, they only will answer the questions that you ask them. And so I
Well, if we
totally
left it
think
up
it's
to
in
them-
the beginning. In the beginning, yes.
If we
go
left
ahead.
it up to them, if you left it up to me, I would look at it and say, okay, here's what we need to get to. This will definitely work. We've done it 5 times already, and that's what we'll get. And the state's going to say yes. Versus, and I think I had said when he was here, initially we want to like open up wide and say, what are all the possibilities out there? And then, all right, let's put some common sense into it, and here are 2 or 3 different options. I think that would
I mean,
be
I learned a
my-
lot going
Yeah.
through the interview process with the other engineers. And so it really opened, I think, all of our eyes that there is not just one solution. And, they basically had come to us, 2 years ago and said, here, this is what you have to do, and it might cost $10 million.
The SRB,
So,
yeah, it said,
I-
here's the technology that works. And, it says, yeah, there's no question it would work.
Yes, I'm just concerned about the pace of a committee versus the pace of the engineer.
Yeah.
It'll be slower with the committee. You're absolutely right
Right.
about that.
Part of the process that Aldrich and Elliott will be doing, or any of the firms that we would have hired, they have to identify different options, present them to the town, to this board, and kind of explain the pieces of it, the cost, also what the extra, the operating costs and, staffing and things that would be required, and then the town chooses from those options. So, perhaps, this committee is involved somewhere in those steps of, when maybe going to visit some of these different plants, where it's going to be staff, but there's going to be some other people looking at the different options of plants, types of plants. So,
I think something
Tom-
like that is far
process.
more valuable than 7 people getting together in
Yeah.
a room who know absolutely nothing or very
Yeah.
limited about
Right.
wastewater treatment.
That's why I think it's important for somebody like Phil to be on the committee, because he does have some of that knowledge. And I think it's important that you can ask those engineers some technical questions with, so we do have some people on that committee who it's not to catch them, but it's just to really understand whether we're getting the best.
Oh, I
Yeah.
understand.
So I don't
that.
see it
just
as a
think
big-
Well, I think Tom's
committee.
saying, let's
Yeah.
make sure it's not so
Yes,
big that
yes.
it's, so really, I mean, if we had 5 or 6 people, that
Well, I
probably
think
would
not so
be
much that
plenty.
it's big, it's that you interject at the right time.
Yes.
We do have a hard deadline.
Yes.
So we have to submit,
By February.
There's
Right.
several dates.
yeah,
Yeah.
so February?
Yeah, February
Yeah.
29th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
End of February.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, we're on it's a pretty tight.
So we'll move quick, we'll get a couple of names who might be interested. We'll make sure that this is a committee that, can, I think, move fairly quickly and not slow down the engineers.
And the staff, I mean,
Yeah, you got Eric.
They have to be a
Yeah.
key role in this,
Yes.
because they're gonna be the ones operating the system, but it's not just for them, but there's an understanding
and I
that this is
think
a
that's
town.
very
That's the big piece.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yes, it's not catered just for the current staff we have right now, because that can always change, but it's something that the town has a good understanding of.
Does that sound all right with everyone?
Yeah.
No, you bring up a good question, Tom. I think you're right. You want to make sure that the committee knows where they're going and needs to get there
All
fairly
right.
quickly.
So you guys are gonna talk about it, and you're gonna get back to me, and then we'll put this on the agenda for the first meeting in November, is that
That sounds reasonable, yeah.
the next meeting, or?
Or
next
maybe
meeting?
next meeting, yeah, so then we can, if we have any
Okay.
further questions.
It might be
then-
good
October
to check in
15th?
with the engineers and see
Yeah.
whether they've started yet.
Yeah,
October 15th.
I mean, I could do that too, so. All right, so then the next item is, I don't know that we'll be approving the budget development process, but a
I
discussion
think
on
this
it.
is just a
A
discussion.
discussion on the development process, and maybe you can tell us what you're thinking.
All right.
Or,
I mean, right now, I have it set up very similar to last year. I'm just trying to look at the calendar and looking at the end game where we need to warn town meeting. And I believe the earliest that we can warn it was January 24th or something like that. So I have the January 28th meeting when we would be warning town meeting. So starting with the next meeting, be the initial discussion on the budget goals, so you guys as I've been talking to in the last few meetings, really be thinking about the goals, and we do a presentation of the draft capital improvement program and budget, and that would be essentially where we left off last year, what the plan was for FY20. At that point, it was just a plan. We only had the FY19 expenditures that we approved. So anything beyond that is just a plan. So we'll look at what we
Look
have.
at the capital plan.
Yep, the capital plan for FY20 and beyond. And then, think about what the priorities are. Are there things that you really feel is important that we stick with? And in the budget, what feedback do you want me to bring to the department heads as they're putting their budgets together? So those are going to be the things that we'd have at that next meeting on October 15th.
Okay. I think it would be helpful for me to, at that point, maybe you could sort of give us a snapshot. Here's where we are. And are there any things out there coming up next year that, hey, the town garage it's going to be a big hit, and here's the hit that we expect to see. Is there anything else out there that you know of ahead of time that is going to have an impact, and or, what you are looking at?
Right.
Hey, we really need to, fix with this thing, or a new truck, or I don't know what it might be, but or a position change. Anything that's big, it would be nice to know, sort of going in, that here's where we kind of stand, and here's where you're looking at, and then the rest of us can sort of say, I think I'm going to be sticking to what I had last year, was let's make sure we're taking care of what we already have.
Absolutely.
And that that I think for myself, but.
So related to that, the town hall, that's, I think, the focus that we want to really be thinking about. That's why we've been working on this, trying to get estimates from people for our roof, looking at, we had a fine painter last year that helped us out with that, and I'm sure he's just dying to do that again this winter.
I can't wait.
Just trying to do improvements here and prioritizing the work that needs to be done, and making a plan for that in the budget. And I think the other thing we're going to be looking at is our payments on our current payments on our trucks and vehicles that we have, as well as buildings, making sure that we have the right, as things, there's always changes in the years, so we want to make sure that we have the right payments for FY20 in the budget, and just looking at healthcare costs. Those are hard to factor because they, it's sort of making a guess at a little point, but kind of keeping an eye on where that's trending. So those are the types of things I'll be looking at right now.
All right. Anything else on that? Looking forward to it.
So and what would be helpful to me, as we tend to have to do some more weekly meetings sometimes, let me know your schedules. Are there times you definitely can't be available? And so that I can start, mapping that out and factoring in days.
Our plan would be to stay on Mondays, ideally.
Stay on Mondays, ideally.
Yeah.
But, as we get into the, once we've gotten all the information, we get into those select board work sessions, are they always at night? Are there sometimes during the day? Or are there, combinations? Okay. So be thinking about what your availability is, what you absolutely can't do. Let me know those times, or what you're willing or able to do in different time frames. That would be really helpful.
Not a bad idea. You conceivably in December you could do a morning one. It's a select board meeting, but it's it's just that.
Right.
And then maybe in January you could do the same thing, and then that might eliminate 3 night meetings.
It would be nice to not have these long meetings because there's other regular work that we do have to fit in somewhere, but we've got to really prioritize the budget. And I don't want these conversations to be when you're so exhausted you're not able to be processing this. We want to be able to give it the time it deserves and really think about it. And so
I thought that's how you got the budget through. You just wore us down. Anyway, that looks good.
There you go.
So I think that's not a bad idea to sort of, I think, think out of the box.
Right.
So.
Would that work at all for you, Erin?
I was just looking at my calendar right here. You know,
Maybe not, huh?
maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess if I had specifics, you know, and it's the busiest time of the year for me.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
you know, you're saying mornings is what you're asking, right?
Well, that was just an idea,
So,
yeah.
so, you know, I could probably make something work.
Yeah, so I mean, if it's not mornings, are there afternoons?
Late afternoons
That
with a-
absolutely
with
would
a
be a mess.
pizza.
That would be a mess.
Okay, all right.
Because, it's either one end or the other.
Okay.
So that's feedback that's just helpful for
Yeah.
me at this end, so if you guys could just let me know, once you look at your schedules, what your
Okay.
availability is or no.
I am and I'm not, because there are certain things I like to do during the day when I finally can enjoy myself a little bit. I mean, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I thought it went
Yeah, it went pretty
pretty
well
easily last year.
I mean,
So
that's
just a
the feedback I'm
reminder
looking
of what
for,
we did.
what things went well, what things you think we could improve on, and, you know.
Seemed like it went
go from there.
pretty well last year.
Yeah.
I felt like everybody got to be part of it, and there were no surprises to anyone. You know, department heads were part of their entire discussion, and so that part went well. But there's always room to improve. So if there's ideas you have that we could do something better, then I'd be very open to hear that.
All right. Good.
All right,
Town administrator report.
town administrator report. I should have gotten the email they sent out to you guys. Let's see, it's been a active day. We had a VT alert training, because they've changed their site again. We had to be retrained, so we did. While it's, I think, in their eyes, easier than it was before, there's still a lot of steps, and so I think we're gonna have to practice a lot before we can go out on our own to do this, so. Let's see, the letter to residents went out.
Yeah,
We've been
thank
getting
you,
a lot of
thank you
feedback.
for doing that,
Yep,
yeah. And the
absolutely.
feedback I got, and, you know, was like, oh, that worked.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So I have a collection of emails. I got everything in there as of 6 p.m. tonight that's in your Dropbox, and then I'll just continue to add to that. And so after the October 15th meeting, we'll also include the verbal feedback that we've gotten from people that have attended at tonight's meeting as well as the 15th, and then we'll, you know, compile all of that information to pass on to CSWD. That is, I had other things in the email.
Yeah,
You have the email with me?
I have the email with me.
Perfect. So we need to advertise for a new town health officer.
Yes.
Yep. So,
And a question was asked to me, you know, why did Kent leave? And am I correct in saying he moved?
he moved.
Okay.
He moved out of town. So,
Not because of that
This was
position.
employed by you, Phil, to take the position over.
No, that's not why he moved. He was heartbroken about not being able to do this. Very important position.
so meanwhile,
Yeah, because he really enjoyed it. I mean, he did.
Yeah,
He told me.
he did. Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
He honestly enjoyed the role.
yeah.
Yeah.
So anyhow, we'll need to start advertising that position again, and until then, we've got our select board chair is sitting in that role. The asset management plan that you guys approved for the utilities department, they've already started
that
walking around
project?
town
Yeah.
and, you know, marking curb stops and all the different pieces. Tyler Billingsley goes around behind and does the starts GPS system, so that is going along, and I think that will prove to be very helpful to them.
So just to clarify, so we did get that. It was a grant.
Right.
Yeah, and because I think when we approved it, it hadn't yet been approved, so.
You approved submitting
Yeah,
that grant, yeah,
right.
and so they
So
did.
that's good.
The grant was approved. And town fair is, this Thursday's town fair, Wednesday is the voting piece of it, so. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to go on to LCT and look at the offerings, but there is a number of different.
And it's in South Burlington?
It's in South Burlington this
Good,
year at the
yeah.
Doubletree Hotel. So if you guys are interested, you're welcome to attend. There you go. That's all I
You'll be
have.
there as a voting delegate.
And I'll be there as the voting
Right.
delegate.
Okay.
Yes, on Wednesday. Yep.
All right.
That's it.
Good.
For me.
Thank you. Thank you, Renee and Joy. Next item is Select Board Forum. Yes, Andrea.
I wanted to acknowledge the passing of Brad Wayner.
Yes.
Brad was a really important and, strong contributor to the town in many ways. He served on the select board. Of course, he was a longtime member of the fire department, on the cemetery commissioner, and I think was really well liked by everybody in town and really had the interests of the town at heart. And so I wanted to acknowledge that.
And I think you would probably agree that those are just some of the public ways he served, but he served in so many ways privately that, people will never know.
Yeah.
Just like years and years of it.
Yeah, I think, just in this last few days, as I was away, I've mentioned it to people, or we brought it up, and people have shared those exact
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And I'm able to share one myself, where I was here maybe just a year, so it was maybe 1985, and I happened to meet him because he worked for the bank, and I had a construction loan, so he came out and talked to me and helped me, and I didn't know him from anybody. So, and then of course more recently, I was reminded about how he just volunteered the property for the town
Yes.
well and the building, without just no questions asked, just like, there it is, and that impacts his property because there's a big circle around that well that can't be developed.
I went to the service on Saturday at the church, and then we went to the fire station afterwards. And it was a beautiful service. It was filled with lots and lots of people, and they shared stories of Brad and his just selflessness and how much Hinesburg meant to him, and how much he gave to Hinesburg and the surrounding community, and what became St. Mike's, this rescue service. He really played an integral role in that too, and he was just there was a common theme. It was just a giving man, as what people shared. So it was very good.
There's a lot of people.
Thank you. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I think I should share that it looks like the vast majority of construction on the Bissonnet Fields is done. I haven't been up for like a week, but I'm pretty sure he got the baseball field seeded, so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exciting.
so all that leaves is the fencing and a few trees. Other than that, pretty incredible.
Yeah.
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 I mean,
So-
really, a couple of years ago, it seemed like, this thing just, it was so hard to get it moving.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is the fencing for particular fields, like
The
backstops?
baseball field.
Yeah, okay.
The
Yeah,
baseball
we're not
field.
fencing the whole thing.
No,
Yeah, okay.
no, we're actually, I've actually reduced after looking at it, what we need, so. I've got a couple guys giving me quotes on that, and hopefully we can get that in possibly this fall. Just for protection more than anything.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right, anybody else? So I just had one item, and that Renee and I will initiate a review of Renee. It's been a year. I'd hoped to do it sooner, but we're ready to start that. And of course, the select board will have input, so you'll see more about that going up. And more than likely, some of the folks in the town, employees too, so we'll start that process. So if you get special treatment from Renee in the next couple of weeks, you'll know
Maybe doing home
why.
deliveries of food and chocolate.
I noticed there were treats today. That's what we need.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that's it for Select Board Forum. So we have minutes from 9:17.
I'll make a
For
motion
review?
to approve them as amended if needed.
Second.
All right. So I'll start, I guess. There was just one the comment on page 2, where we are looking at the wastewater, and it's the third from the end of the first section there. Wayne explained if the project does not happen, the town would qualify for the 50% loan money of $31,200 and would have years to pay back. So I think the question, Aaron, you had said, what happens if we don't get
Yeah.
this grant? And, well, we're paying half of it, 31, and we would then have time, if it didn't happen, we would have that time to pay it back. It was a little confusing to me when I first read it, but I mean, there was an expectation we would certainly get the grant. So, I don't know.
So the grant, it's a loan and a grant because it starts out at $62,400,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so the expectation is that
50% loan forgiveness, I think, is what
right,
it's
yeah,
doing,
yeah. But if the project doesn't go through, then we're obligated to pay the loan, the full $62,400, I think, because the assumption is that $31,000 that we're paying will get rolled into the bond.
Right.
And so, but if for some reason the bond doesn't go through, then I think
We have to pay the
we have to pay the
$31,000.
full 62.
I think it's the 31.
Yeah, I think it is too.
Oh,
I'll
okay.
double check
All
with
right.
Wayne. I
Okay.
originally spoke about, I mean, that obviously.
Okay. So if the bond doesn't go through, then maybe we only have to pay back the 31.
I think
But
that's
over a
what I
long
think.
period of time.
Yeah.
That's how I interpreted
Okay.
it.
So we can maybe leave it the way it is, and we'll get clarification on really that item. And then the next two sentences, Phil addressed the committee to work with Aldrich and Elliott, suggesting members be Eric Bailey, Renee, or Joy, rather than Renee and Joy. I think that's how it looks. As we're talking today, or clarified today, these are just possibilities. And that's all I
Well, you
have.
just saying address the committee means you suggested to us, to the board?
Well, yeah, I realized
Yeah,
when he just
right,
read it,
yeah.
it sounded weird, yeah.
Okay, so you'll-
In addressing the fact of the committee, so I'll clear
Okay.
that up too.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Good point. I just read it
You
twice.
just put discussed.
I was gonna say address the idea of the committee.
Okay.
All right, any other items?
We are missing Mary Lee.
I know.
She'd be red penning all over on you.
And I should have acknowledged the fact that Mary Lee was out of town, out of the state, and she
Out of the country.
out of the country, out of this world. And she had said she couldn't make the meeting and wouldn't be able to call in.
Yeah.
So I should have noted that at the very beginning. And so now she's definitely missed. Any more comments on the minutes?
Exactly.
All right, so then all those in favor of approving the minutes as noted, say aye.
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 Aye, so that motion passed. The next item, consider approving the warrants.
I'll make a motion to approve payroll and AP warrants
Second.
for this week, or whatever the date is
Any
there.
discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, so that passed. And so we did, I should have noted this at the beginning of the meeting, we did have our normal agenda item to consider going into executive session, but we don't need to do that this time. So the next, unless somebody has anything else, the next item would be a motion to adjourn, which I'll make. Motion to adjourn. Second.
Ahead of schedule.
Look at the time, guys.
3 minutes.
Right.
Not yet. All those in favor, any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So we are now adjourned.
And for that, you gotta.